an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Awaken, the Children of Divinity, Book 1 by Garth Reesby. Chapters 1 through 5 and a drop of Chapter 6. In these chapters, we meet a character named Jordan, who has some uncanny abilities, as do some of her enemies, we find out. And she is being selected by Nick Fury. Just kidding. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Heather for commissioning this episode. Heather is here in the chat, and Heather's husband, I believe you said, was the one who wrote this. So yeah, she wanted to get her hub's name out there, I think, and find out what I thought about it. And it's always like a little bit high pressure when somebody who is connected to a person who wrote a thing, or who is the person who wrote a thing, commissions me to read it, because I'm like, if I hate it, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to feel terrible. I did not hate it. I thought this was super fun, and I really wanted to keep reading, actually. So thumbs up from this girl. And it was very unexpected, because you hear the name Children of Divinity. That's a title that feels extremely like high fantasy to me. And I really thought that's what we were going to, like, you know, the cover doesn't tell you a lot about the kind of book it's going to be, except for that there is a target and that there's like the silhouette of London, the bullet building and the big giant wheel. And I will be honest with you guys, I didn't even really look at the cover. So I just I was looking for the Children of Divinity, and I ran into a bunch of other names that had like similar words paired together on Amazon, and they were all very fantastical, and those sort of just blended together in my head. So by the time I found the actual book that I was looking for, I didn't even like comprehend that, oh, this cover was really pointing to a whole different thing than the others were. So when this starts off, the opening line of this, the bitter cold of the Afghani night had yet to give way to the impressive heat of the day, and the sun had not even begun its slow crawl from behind the rugged mountains. Already I'm like, oh, Afghanistan. Oh, we're in the real world. Okay, that's surprising. And then we go on to talk about like the truck's 4-cylinder gas engine. And I'm like, oh, it's not even set in the past, or like there's trucks. I kept being surprised. This was just me being unprepared. But that's part of the fun also of doing Spoil Me, is that I really try not to like find out anything about what I'm covering beforehand, because I just like to go into it without even the barest like outline of the plot. That's what is fun for me, is totally discovering a thing. So the way this starts off is this woman is hiding in the scrub under camouflage. Can't believe I forgot the word for camouflage. And she has a target that she is meant to snipe. Is that... She's a sniper. Is snipe a word? I feel like that's not right. But she has evidently been there for like 2 days, just waiting for her shot, because they know that this person, the target, is eventually going to be there. And I just have to say, how not built for the military I am. Like, can you imagine? Just literally being under a tarp for 2 days, waiting, and you can't like barely like move to draw attention to yourself. Like, absolutely fucking not. No, sir. So we get the setup immediately of how like she's on the ground and she's well hidden, And these two dudes that we first meet that are just sentries walk right past her, very close, and they don't even notice that she is there. I'm sorry if my desk has been making this weird, like, clicking lately, and it is driving me a little bit batty. So, finally, at this point, the two trucks that show up, she is starting to realize, I think, that the target is coming in with this group of people. And as she's watching them get out of the truck, unload the truck, she was there because she was the only one who could make it so deep into enemy territory without being discovered. Now, I'm thinking, because we're in the present day, well, not really, like, you know, it was the present day when this was begun, or perhaps close to it, and because it's the real world, I'm just like, oh, maybe this is going to be more of like a thriller without any supernatural stuff in it at all, which I don't feel like I've covered almost anything that didn't have supernatural elements to it, which I never really stopped to think about. But I really was like, all right, maybe this is just going to be a very different vibe from other stuff that I've covered. This should have been a clue that she's able to do something that nobody else can do. And yet, I just took it as, oh, she's super talented. She's just like, perhaps due to other training that she's had in her life. No, we find out that she has an ability. And I'm very curious because the way that that is written later, I wasn't totally sure if I should take it at face value or if there was a typo. Because there is like a way it's written that I was like, I'm not sure. And we will get to that. So, pushing the brief moment of reflection to the back of her mind, Jordan focused her attention on the mission at hand. Fate seemed inclined to reward her discipline. The procession of 20 men and donkeys Jordan had been waiting for picked their way out of a large shadowed crack in the weathered rock wall as if on cue. So she has her gun ready, her sniper rifle. And there's a lot of detail here about the rifle. I am super, super curious what other people who know about guns would take away from this, because as somebody who knows nothing about guns, I had no idea. I read it and I just let it wash over me, so to speak. But I don't know anything about this and whether it's meant to point out the fact that this is an unusual gun for this, like, kind of job, or if it's just meant to like inform us what tools she's working with and what she's used to using. But yeah, this for me just did not register at all. It's fine. So she finally finds the target, and we find out the kind of bad man this is. So the crew here is all Taliban, which it's wild to me how much the landscape of our like concerns as a nation has changed, because I feel like I haven't heard about the Taliban now for like 5 years. It's just completely off the radar, and it was everywhere. Like, you just could not turn on the news without fucking shit about the Taliban. And now it's like, we still certainly have Islamophobia and xenophobia. That's all absolutely still there. But like, specific talk about Taliban doesn't feel like it's part of the conversation anymore. And so this kind of felt like, wow, just not exactly blast from the past, more of a reminder of how quickly things have changed in terms of what our conversations are about these days. So we find out this man had helped orchestrate over 24 attacks against American and British forces in Afghanistan, and had been responsible for a terrorist bombing at Heathrow Airport only 4 hours after the destruction of the Twin Towers. Not talked about a lot, the thing with Heathrow Airport. Is this person a real person that he was like sort of basing this on? I'm curious, Heather. Because the way this is set up, it feels like there was a lot of research put into the people like surrounding this area, but I have no frame of reference to know if that's true or not, or if it's just me assigning a thing because I'm like, oh yeah, this sounds real, because I don't know anything. He had murdered hundreds, but worse yet, he had trained hundreds more. A cadre of like-minded fanatics that could potentially kill thousands of innocent people. Jordan was here to make sure he had trained his last terrorist, committed his last murder. So I really love this detail. A strong, cold wind caught the cloth around the man's head and tugged it to the side, causing Jordan to smile slightly. The flapping of the material allowed her to easily gauge the wind speed where he was standing. This is some shit that I find really fascinating. I am not really interested in learning how to use a gun, other than I feel like it's probably a handy thing to know, but it's not something that I'm like gonna go out and make an effort to find training or buy a gun, because guns are so expensive, BT dubs. I had no idea until I was reading an article about something, and they talked about, like, you know, your average Glock being like $600, and I was like, it's what? I had no idea. But I am fascinated by the variety of factors that go into marksmanship, like the wind, sun angles, the angle that you are shooting from. Your, like, eyesight, of course, is a factor, but you have scopes now, so it might be less of a factor than one would think, and scopes can do different things. Also, just your breathing will affect stuff. And I do find that sort of thing. I'm always a fan of skills that take a lot of training to perfect the form. This is part of why I've always liked yoga and ballet as exercise. It's because you have to learn how to hold yourself in such a way that that's in itself a huge amount of practice and change fundamentally to, like, the way that you operate. And so this kind of, like, marksmanship in this way, I feel like I could see being in a similar vein, you know. I've always had a similar feeling about golf in terms of, like, the analyzing of a swing, but every other part of golf seems just so painfully boring that I've just never been able to get past that. So she is watching this man and is about to pull the trigger. And we have this weird moment, and I was like, oh, okay, this isn't just a thriller. This is a supernatural thing. The Muhaddin Leader, the Muhaddin Leader's head started to turn to face Jordan's position. The man's eyes met Jordan's through the view of her scope and began to shift from a warm brown to solid white. Like the scrabbling of dozens of clawed feet on stone, an unintelligible whisper filled Jordan's mind. A pain so intense that it made Jordan's jaw clench accompanied the disturbing sound and seemed to be growing. Instinctively, Jordan squeezed the trigger. The familiar recoil of the weapon rippled through her arms and shoulders, but she kept the rifle on target. The bullet crossed the intervening terrain quickly, leaving a hint of distorted air in its passing. Spoilers! This man gets shot in the head and dies. I will be honest. I wasn't sure what the beginning of this book was planning to do, because you could do something George R.R. Martin-ish, where you have an intro and then that person is definitely going to die. And we could have had her be the setup for, like, we don't know at this point that she can do anything supernatural herself. We could have just had her be like the person that we're on her side and we're rooting for her because this is a very bad man, TM. But then unexpectedly he's able to do some shit she wasn't prepared for and she winds up dead and we're standing there like, oh shit. But no, she does turn out to be the main character because I didn't know that, you know? And so she manages to get her shot off and she does kill him. But we find out later that the abilities of this man were, like, somewhat well known to this other faction of people that approach her later. And they say that if he had been closer, he could have lobotomized her. Which, yikes. Okay. I mean, I guess I could see why somebody would be a leader if they are in a position where they could do some shit like that. I am really curious about what other people think he can do. Like, are the people who follow him, were they aware he could do this stuff? And was that part of why they followed him? Or was that just like a nice bonus on top of the abilities and whatnot that he had already, like, you know, the regular human charisma. I'm very curious about, like, the dynamic of that. How much people need to know that you can do a thing versus how much they just need to know that you're really scary. And that detail about exactly how you accomplish whatever isn't actually really necessary because the mythology of you becomes its own thing. And so you don't need to prove by doing it in front of anybody what you're capable of. Ooh, I'm sorry. My phone is buzzing. And this moment, just before it hits him, the bullet, she hears the whispering in her head turn into just Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, which I found also a little bit interesting because there's like this cynical part of me that expects for a person who has these abilities and who is like organizing a sort of like faction of fanatics, I expect them to like not really believe in their cause entirely. And for those to be his last words, that feels like, no, he definitely fucking believed this shit. He was 100% on it for real. So everybody, of course, drops flat as soon as this guy gets shot. And now it is time for Jordan to bail. And we get some really neat information about the way that this is handled. One of the things that you do is you pour vinegar over the site where you had been laying in order to make sure that the dogs aren't able to track your scent, which is really neat. I never knew that that was a thing. This is like another thing too about the kinds of stories and shows that I cover. There are a lot of books out there about military operations, about secret agents, about, just like thrillers about assassins and shit that aren't working for the government or anything in any capacity, where I'm sure that these sorts of things would be common knowledge if you read stuff like that. But for me, I don't really touch books like that. And it's not even out of an aversion. It's not like I am totally uninterested in reading things like that. It's more like I have such a backlog of things that fall under the fantasy category that I already want to read that I sort of have this mental like state where I'm like, oh, I'll get to those types of books once I'm done with fantasy stuff, which like that's never going to happen. I don't know why I think that's ever a place I will be. But I think that's been sort of subconsciously how I have approached that sort of thing. And also, there is like a real maleness to those sorts of stories that I think is probably another factor that I find sort of off-putting because I'm concerned that it's going to be really male-gazy or toxic or, that kind of like vibe that just makes you feel like you're getting a look at some of the worst parts of the male psyche sometimes. And so unless I were to know ahead of time, oh yeah, this writer is to be trusted and I don't have to worry about that garbage turning up in this, I'm just kind of afraid to like pick things up without really knowing beforehand that this is going to be safe and cool. But yeah, so anyway, just wanted to mention that because it's just a frame of reference for like how little I know about anything like this. And I'm also not somebody who's watched a lot of war movies or anything that really would have this sort of detail in it. The closest I've gotten to anything like that is like the Bourne movies, which are, fantastical. So though her shot was well over the world record for a long-range kill, Jordan took no time to revel in it. It wasn't the first she had made at such a range. None of her best shots would ever be recorded in a history book, yet history had been irrevocably altered by many of them. Jordan took no pleasure in killing, but understood that there were certain people that couldn't be dealt with by any other means. Listen, I am against the death penalty because I believe the state is not to be trusted in terms of its determination of guilt, its treatment of criminals, and the targeting of marginalized people. However, I definitely do believe that there are people that should be dead, that the world would be better off without, safer without, and that keeping them alive benefits absolutely nobody. And so, I'm fine with it. Just saying. So she gets her shit together. She pours this vinegar all over her sight. And then all of a sudden she hears this boot sound and turns, and there's a dude right here. So this is the part where I was like, is this a typo, or is this a use of the word that I'm going to find out is sort of the way she thinks about things? Turning her head, the British operative stared into the eyes of the Afghani man, imaging herself as thin and light as a morning's breeze. It could be imagining herself, and it's a typo, or it could be imaging herself, like making the image of herself, which works too, which would be kind of cool. Heather says, damn it, typo. Well, it's actually a pretty cool typo though, because it works in its way, you know? So I was kind of like, oh, is she imaging herself? Like, you know, that feels like it could be a verb that you use when you're projecting what you look like to somebody else. And this dude is like right there and looking at her, and he cannot see her. And he knows that he saw something, and he really saw detailed something. He saw that she had dark hair and gorgeous blue eyes. He saw that she was tall, that she had a backward baseball cap on, that she had camouflage. He saw fucking the whole bit. But then she's just not there. And that is pretty wild. And I am really, really like interested in what other things she can do, because as we find out later, she also has a healing factor. So are those the only two things that she can do? Is her being an amazing marksman also a thing, or is that just a skill that works because of other things that, you know, I don't know. So then we jump, there's like a break, and she is running and putting some distance between her and the people who are following her, and also is prepared to, they like drive by in their trucks, and it's very easy to sort of like hear that they've gone past her and think, oh, they didn't know that she was there. But she thinks about how the likely tactic they're using here is that they're driving past the place they think that she could possibly have gotten to by this point. And then they will park, get out, and proceed by foot backward over the ground that they have covered and try and zero in on her. And she makes her way into this cave and sort of like settles down there for a little while for a bit of a break, and checks in with the person who is in charge of her team. And she thinks about, where is it? I should have waited and blown the engine blocks on the two trucks to put them all on foot. Rookie mistake, girl. You should have tidied up that bit before you exfiltrated. I have never heard the word exfiltrate. I find it very amusing that infiltrate has an opposite. I don't know why I never thought of it, but I didn't. And she's thinking about the, I'm trying to find the spot. Oh, here it is. Jordan's director, Nigel Stevens, had never admitted it while she was in the room, which we find out later is due to misogyny. But Jordan was one of the few of his operatives that could make it so far into enemy territory without being detected. Her past work had shown she was exceptionally good at getting into and out of locations that were so-called impossible targets. Jordan knew that Stephen's real issue was that he couldn't figure out how she did it. It was her secret, and she was going to keep it as long as possible. And we find out that, like, she really had to fight to be taken seriously, which, of course. And once they figure out where their target is, and they realize that we're not going to be able to, like, bomb where he is because that will cause too many, like, civilian casualties, they realize they're going to have to infiltrate, but they don't know how they're going to manage it. And finally, she's just like, I am going to do it by myself. And it's not like she's not a lone gun, you know, she didn't go rogue to decide to do this. She's got approval, but they weren't happy about it, is really what it is. And this is when she checks in, Unconsciously, Jordan caressed her ring finger with the tip of her thumb, the absence of the recently placed engagement ring surprisingly noticeable for having only been there 3 months. And that is a true thing. You don't have to wear that ring long, and all of a sudden you're very aware of it, and when it's not there. I have not been wearing mine because it broke, basically, so I had it made into a necklace, which I have been wearing, and there is another ring on its way. But, yeah, it is a real, I am always aware that I don't have it on. So, I feel you, girl. Toss a small canister. M16 operatives, the stuff called Spook Be Gone. I think it's called the stuff Spook Be Gone. The fine mist filled the cave and covered everything it touched in an ammonia-based film formulated to destroy DNA evidence as well as kill any scent. And that is the end of chapter 2. Or chapter 1. So when we start chapter 2, Jordan's at Heathrow, and she is meeting Brian, her fiancé, for the first time in months. They have not seen each other. I think it's months, right? And yeah, they haven't seen each other in 3 months. And I really enjoy this relationship because I wasn't really sure what the deal was going to be with the person that she's in a relationship with. And what I mean by that is he going to know what she does? Is he going to be somebody who also does the thing? Is she going to have to pretend to just be a regular person? And how would you pull that off? And what it is he's a diplomat and also a count, I think it's mentioned. And he understands that she is doing something that is sort of spooky. He doesn't really know, and he is okay with not knowing, although he does worry about her. He has respect for the fact that she is, in a line of work that it's likely better for him if he doesn't know anything, and certainly better for her. And I really appreciated that balance of him knowing enough but not being in on the whole thing. And yet the fact that he's a diplomat keeps him linked to this world that she's in enough that he doesn't feel like he's a total outsider. Because while I understand the trope of, oh, you're doing a thing and the rest of your family has no idea and has no relationship to what you do at all, it feels false to me a lot of the time. This sense of, oh, I have this completely normal life that I have a hidden identity. Somehow nobody's figured it out. Nobody has noticed any inconsistencies. And I have somehow managed to forge this relationship with a person who doesn't know any of the truth about me. And yet I am meant to think that I love them and they love me. And that is the kind of thing that I always find really difficult, is that I don't feel like you can have that kind of secret and genuinely call the relationship that you have with somebody love if they don't know a core part of your identity and what you can do. Now, I say that with the awareness that it doesn't seem like Brian knows about Jordan's abilities. I could be wrong about that. I don't think so, though. However, that's a different thing. I mean, it is a core part of who she is, but I can understand just being yeah, that's not something anybody's ever going to find out about. That is my personal private secret. That's just off the radar from anything that I could make a metaphor for, so I won't try. But I get that. It's just, the career of somebody who does this sort of thing is such a major part of their identity, because you have to undergo some extensive training. You have to have a whole mindset that a lot of people can't relate to. And the idea of forging a relationship with somebody who hasn't got any of that in common with you. And if she was married to a dude who just runs a bakery or something, I would just be like, how? What do you even talk about? But him being a diplomat and him also having assignments that wind up sending him away for months at a time, it makes it so that they each have something that's an international concern that kind of changes the whole landscape of their lives and the way that they can live together. It makes it so that she can be away for a time and he also is away and there's no resentment there. I really appreciated that dynamic because it felt believable and it felt like he would value somebody who has the same priorities that he does. So it makes sense that he would be interested in her because of the commitment that she has to this. So let's see. Heather says, Garth based Brian's appearance off Hugh Jackman. Oh, nice. So yeah, he comes off the plane and there is like this immediate chemistry between the two of them. They basically like want to bang right in the lobby of the airport. And they are heading back to his flat and they have takeout in the back seat. And there's this really, what he does really well here is set up how much she's looking forward to spending time with him right before she gets called in. As somebody who has a partner who has a job where he can be called in at any moment, I am acutely aware of this kind of scenario. I mean, Owen and I have been almost an hour away pulling into a movie theater parking lot and he got called in and we had to turn the car around and go back. Like, I know what this is like and it is heartbreaking. It's the worst. I will say that at least it's not she's not called back in and then sent on assignment. She's called back in for a meeting and then she's allowed to leave again, which thank God. So yeah, and there's like the smell of the curry takeout in the back seat and she's just really hungry. I was just like, oh my God. So she comes in and we get a nice bit of like a look at the relationship that she has to Steven's secretary, who recognizes her immediately, apologizes for calling her in and asks how Brian is. So like really clearly knows her fairly well. And this woman whose name is Daphne tells her that the person that is in there with Stevens is not somebody that she has ever seen before, that he has a swagger to him that makes her think that he was a field agent. And generally, she has no idea what this is about. And we get a bit of a backstory here. Let's see. The lack of quality time with Brian was wearing thin, but Jordan wasn't sure what to do about it. This was a new experience for Jordan. She had dated infrequently during her life, and for her, men had been a pleasant distraction that satisfied her physical needs. The emotional attachment was always messy and only created dangerous distractions. She had never needed any man in her life. Brian had been different, and he was the one man that made Jordan feel like an inelegant schoolgirl. It always seemed as if she had a foolish grin on her face when she was with him, even if her expression didn't show it. Now she was lonely when Bryant wasn't with her. She wanted to feel his comforting embrace and hear the gentle words he would whisper in her ear as they lay in bed at night. The part of Jordan that was independent and pragmatic didn't like these new emotions. Love, neediness, attachment. All distractions that she couldn't afford in the field. It recognized what she was feeling as a form of fear. Fear of loss. Fear of another woman sweeping in to steal what she held so dear. And unlike the fear of being killed in combat, there was no adrenaline, no survival instinct to quash it. I like that. I am also a person that I have like very clear coping mechanisms. And when you have coping mechanisms that simply can't be applied to the situation that you're in, that's so annoying. You know, it's just really frustrating because we hone those coping mechanisms all our lives. They're our tools. That's the thing that we go to. So when you have them all primed and ready and it turns out that they just don't fucking work here, what now? Like, that's not fair. I didn't agree to this. So finally she gets called in and Director Stevens, who seems like a little bit of a shit, he gets dismissed, basically, by this dude in a really expensive suit who, the vibe of him is sexy dangerous. Let's see, I'm trying to find the spot. The man was attractive with dark hair and a soldier's muscular build. Tall and lean, with intense gray eyes, the man had hard, weather-worn features that reminded Jordan of old paintings depicting the Greek gods Zeus or Ares. The midnight black suit the mysterious man wore was Hugo Boss, immaculate and very pricey. Jordan noted that he wore no rings, lapel pins, or any other sorts of identifiable decoration. So, this dude, like I said, is, dismisses Stevens. This is a private conversation, if you please. And Stevens is irritated at being dismissed from his own office, which I don't blame him for. But he leaves, and finally, this dude turns to her and is like, hey, so, short story, I know you are a freak mutant. That's what I'm calling her, but I don't think that's actually what's happening here. And that you can do all of these things because I have looked into your history. I have looked into your medical records. I can tell that you heal super quickly. You never get sick. And she is immediately like, oh my God, 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 oh my God. And has this moment. This is a really neat way of saying this. Jordan felt the familiar and unwelcome sensation of fear constrict her chest. She knew that at least one of her sisters displayed these powers, for lack of a better word, and wisely both she and Ryan had hidden their abilities from everyone. Now, Jordan tapped those powers and with a single breath unchained her mind. I think that's such a neat turn of phrase. She let herself enter a state of hyper-accelerated speed of thought and action, which caused everything in the world to slow down to a crawl. She needed time to think and weigh her options. This man knew what she could do, so Jordan assumed that he knew about her sister, too. She was terrified that whoever he worked for would sweep in and abduct her siblings in the middle of the night. No doubt each of them would be tested to determine what they could do, if anything, and how they did it. What happened after that took Jordan to a place she didn't want to go. The thought of her sisters being dissected or imprisoned for the rest of their lives was too much to bear. So, she's looking at this dude and she's basically like, what am I going to do? I could fight this guy. And I'm thinking to myself, could you? Because, no offense, but what makes you think that? You've always been on top before, but clearly since this guy knows who you are, I would think he would also have some abilities of his own. Perhaps not, but let's just assume that he does. I don't think I would be as confident about that with somebody who has made it clear they are aware of you. And then she thinks about Brian. And just what it would do if she tried to, fight her way out of here or cause problems. So she calms herself down. And when she kind of comes back to the conversation, he's talking about Ramiz Kazir. He was a mid-level telepath. You were lucky. He could have lobotomized you if he had been closer. But that's why we sent you, isn't it? So, the reason that he was able to zero in on her, I am assuming, and I'm talking about Ramiz Kazir, is because she was so completely focused on him herself in that moment because she was about to kill him. So, I think that he, it's not like he's always constantly aware of everything that's going on around him. But if there is a bunch of psychic energy directed toward him because somebody is about to literally murder him, he can sense it. I'm saying can like he isn't dead, but I just feel like that is super unfair. That just doesn't seem, and he says he could have lobotomized you if he had been closer. And I'm like, he might have been able to lobotomize her if she hadn't been closer. She was experiencing some extreme pain, and it was luck that she happened to, have sighted him and have her finger on the trigger already, and managed to just pull and do the shot. If she hadn't already been in place, I don't know that she could have done it. He may have been able to incapacitate her. He says, this man who, do we get the name of this guy? I don't know if you even are introduced with his actual name. He says, I'm here to offer you more. A chance to become not just one of the best, but the best. I can provide training in how to use your abilities and a chance to put them to work for Queen and Country in a more useful way than you ever have before. I may even be able to tell you how you came to have these gifts of yours. Interested? And she's like really wanting to be flippant about it and just be like, yeah, fuck you. But she can't help it. She's just like, I am interested. This is very, very interesting, in fact. And we get a little bit of a flashback, not really, but a memory that she's thinking to herself about. As a child, Jordan tried to jump from the roof of their stable to a fence post on the far side of the exercise yard. The jump was too ambitious, and Jordan had broken both of her legs when she had landed. Her younger sister Ryan had found Jordan lying on the ground covered in dirt and grass. Ryan had taken Jordan's hand to help her sit up when Jordan's legs re-knitted themselves. The pain of the bones mending in seconds was so intense that Jordan lost focus and broke Ryan's hand with her enhanced strength. Ryan's scream brought her father running, but instead of telling him what had really happened, Ryan lied and told him that one of the horses had stepped on her hand. It had taken weeks for Ryan to heal, and Jordan spent every waking moment of her 10-year-old existence making sure Ryan had what she needed. So, it's mentioned earlier that Ryan also has her own abilities, and I'm curious whether it's the same. You know, is she able to do the same things? Does she have her own whole set of abilities? And this guy is saying, you have stipulations, of course, and so do I. You cannot tell anyone what you will be doing. You will have to accept that you will tell lies to those you love. Do things that even you may find distasteful. I was kind of like, wow, the shade of that. Even you monster. Do things that even you may find distasteful because our country needs them done. For this, you will be well compensated and your family will be looked after. If you pass the selection process, you will be inducted into an elite group that will push you to new levels of excellence. This is a one-time offer, by the by, and limited in duration. And she had a multitude of questions, but he was looking to her for a response, and she sensed it was important to make a good showing of herself. If I agree to this, I expect my family to be left alone, period. Let them live their lives. If I find out that you're responsible for any harm that comes to them, I'm going to kill you and anyone involved. Jordan's determined expression was backed by the conviction in her voice. Agreed, he replied calmly, as if her threat was never voiced. You will have a month off to spend with your fiancé, and then you'll be contacted to begin your training. Your fiancé is going to be temporarily assigned to London for the month. In fact, it's already done. Then he will report to Moscow as he was intended to while you complete the first phase of your training free of distraction. And he holds out his hand for her to shake and make this deal. And, Ethan McIntyre, we get his name after all of this. Right. And she's a little bit, salty over the fact that he just takes it for granted that she's going to agree to this. And later on, it's put paid because she gets home and her fiancé is already in the midst of, a meltdown because of his reassignment. So that shit was, put into motion before she agreed because it was such a foregone conclusion that she would. And she's just a little bit fuck you. Director of Special Operations Squadron 7. SOS? That's not very comforting, Jordan quipped blithely. So, he hands her a card that has a number on it. And then we go into chapter 4. And this is when she gets home. And Brian is absolutely losing his mind on, I don't know, maybe an assistant. And she manages to calm him down with a promise of sex, which doesn't always work as well as you want it to work, but does tend to have a pretty good track record. And then we go to chapter 5, Port Newark. And I felt real bad. I was like, oh no, we're in a new POV. All of a sudden, this guy is definitely going to die. And indeed, that is what happens. His name is Danny Kine, which I don't know if that is purposeful. But the word kine is meant to be basically, I believe it's meant to be a deer or cow. Basically, it's, you're for the slaughter. You are a farm animal, So I was like, oh, that doesn't bode well either. And he is with this dude who is new to the job. He is a security guy. And there are always new people because this is not an easy or comfortable job. So the fact that this guy is new doesn't make much of an impression on him. And he is Russian. And as soon as I heard that he was Russian, I was like, okay, because Moscow has been brought up more than once now. I feel like there has to be some sort of connection going on with this. And this dude, Danny's talking about how cold it is and says something about his grandma's poodle's balls falling off. And this dude says something like, I am from Russia. We have snows that would bury your grandma's house there. If you are so cold, maybe you should just go get some of her, what is it, cannelloni? Danny watched the large man with a hard gaze. Hey, you better not talk too much about my grandmother, Vlad. First the house, then her cooking. Next thing you know, I'm laying your bald ass out. Got it? This job pays for that fucking house. I bust my fucking ass to pay for that goddamn house. And I was like, oh, Danny, I know that you mean well, but this is not going to go well for you, sweetie. Vlad is not somebody to be fucked with. And it turns out that is true. Danny just really takes it to heart, the comment that this guy made, that I don't know if it was maybe the tone of voice that he said it in, but I wouldn't take it that seriously, but Danny just really feels like he's extremely offended. So they are going up to this area that is a gated and full of shipping containers, and they have to do their thrice a night traverse of this place to make sure that there's nobody breaking in. And the Russian guy is like, hey, this place looks plenty secure. How about we just go get some coffee? And this dude takes his job pretty seriously. And he's like, not only am I not going to do that because this is my job, but also there are security cameras everywhere, and they will notice if we don't go in there 3 times a day. They aren't idiots, which, that's one of those things that Owen, his family owns a cleaning company. And it's a really tough thing to find reliable people because, unfortunately, a lot of folks, when they are meant to carry on a job without supervision constantly, they let themselves completely fall off what they are supposed to be doing. I can understand how this would happen, but it's the kind of thing that they just seem to forget that there are ways to check in on you and see if you've done what you were meant to do. So there'll be people who just straight up lie about how long they were at an account cleaning, like they're supposed to be there for 5 hours, and they left after 2.5. And yeah, they go and they look at the security footage, and oftentimes it's the client that goes and looks, and they'll be like, she left in almost half the time that you told me she would be here. I checked. And I love, those people always try and be like, no, I stayed a certain amount of time, until you tell them, we have it on film. It is time stamped. We know when you fucking left. Stop it. People love to lie. So yeah, this bit, I was like, well, Danny, you would have been a good worker for Owen. I wish that you weren't dead and that you were real and that you could come here. So they step inside, and first red flag, camera that is normally there is gone. And Danny assumes that some kids stole it, which I'm really curious whether or not that is something that, he thinks about how he likes beating up kids a little bit later. I bet those little bastards we caught over in the Transco storage area yesterday came over here and stole the fucking cameras. Let's see. I'm going to break those little fuckers' knees when we get them. Each man nodded. Danny smiled in anticipation as he thought about beating the crap out of the teenagers. He briefly wondered how the kids got over the tall razor wire topped fences, but the thought was discarded. Kicking the occasional kid or transient's ass was a favored diversion in an otherwise boring job. Sir, get a hobby. You really, like, when you're excited to kick the ass of somebody who is homeless or a child, you need to reevaluate the way that you are living your life. I'm just saying. So, he hears people talking, and he steps around the corner, and there are these huge dudes. 7 of the largest men Danny Kine had ever seen, which I'm just like, are they actually just men, or are they enhanced, or are they like, what is it? Moving several steel-colored cylindrical containers into the back of a waiting black speedboat. All of the men were dressed in black wetsuits with combat harnesses on. Each man had a small radio bud in their ear, and each also carried a Russian-made assault rifle and a holstered pistol. And Danny turns around and is like, okay, this is too much for me. And I was like, you know what? I admire your fucking common sense, because a lesser man would have been like, I'm going to handle it. No, you are not. I guarantee that you are not. He turns around and he's looking around to see where Vlad is. I don't think we actually get his name. And sees Vlad coming towards him. The new guy's expression was hard as he walked toward Danny, but Danny supposed that he was probably trying not to look scared. Oh, Danny. So he turns and is like, we're going to call the cops. And as he turns around, Vlad's hand comes over his mouth from behind. And Danny tries to fight back. And Vlad is really fucking strong. Like, much stronger than Danny anticipated, even though this man was described as being a pretty big dude to begin with. And the dude says, you should have gone for the coffee. His tone almost sympathetic. He tightened his grip on Danny's mouth and reached behind his back. When the hand returned, it held a black combat knife. Then the Russian drew the razor-sharp blade across Danny's throat, opening the precious blood vessels there. Danny Kine thrashed for several moments, but each spasm of motion was weaker than the last. He couldn't break the man's iron grip no matter what he tried, and soon his muscles refused to respond. And he whispers to him, I will make certain that your grandmother's house is paid for. Honestly, that's a pretty baller line. And if I were dying and somebody said that to me as I was dying, that would really help ease my passing. If somebody was like, oh, by the way, I'm going to make sure that your family is like looked after. I mean, that would help. I would not be happy to die. I wouldn't be happy with that person or thankful, but it would help. So I appreciate it. The thought that counts. So when I said that I only read a drop of chapter 6, chapter 6 is at the 40-page mark, and I wanted to get within like a little bit closer to 50 pages. But there was no good place to stop at around the 50-page mark. And if I went all the way to chapter 7, it was going to be over by like 15 pages. It was just too much. So I read chapter 6 up until the like line of asterisks, which is another additional like 5 pages or so. So when we start chapter 6, we've jumped ahead. And the month that Jordan has gotten to spend with Brian is up. And she's thinking back to the time that they got to spend together. And all I can think is like, you guys got this great time because you're definitely not going to get to be together again. And I don't know if that's true, but it's the feeling that I have of just like, oh, that was the good times. And now those are over and they're never coming back. I'm sorry. You know, this is like the beginning of Song of Ice and Fire, where all of the Starks are together and all of them are at Winterfell and all of the people are happy and fed and it's warm and yeah. So Brian is still not over the fact that he was reassigned and he wasn't able to find out who authorized it. And that's really the thing that's sort of like eating away at him, is that nobody will tell him why it is that this happened. And I think that he's used to him being somebody who can get the information that he wants. And now he's found out that there is somebody out there with more power than him, higher up than him, whom either people are protecting, or maybe he's so high up that nobody even knows who he is, which that must make you uncomfortable. And Brian is trying to kind of get it out of Jordan what's going on here, because he can tell that she knows something that he doesn't. I'm going to Moscow and you're not coming with me. I had to call in a lot of favors to get you assigned with me. And now you're about to run off with a bunch of bootnicks again to God knows where. And she interrupts and says, I know it isn't easy, but we both have a duty to do. I'll come visit as soon as I'm able. But you're not going to tell me what you're up to. Correct. I can't tell you. And you know that. Do you tell me absolutely everything about your work? I know for a fact that you don't. No, but it isn't the same thing. It's me, Brian, my life, my career. I'm not housewife material, and you knew that before you asked me to marry you. I can't sit around chatting it up with the girls. I need to do something. Something that has meaning. Something that makes a difference. My work means a lot to me. And this sort of seems to calm him down. And she says something about how amazing the month has been that they have gotten to spend together. And mundane things in her world of intrigue and action reminded her she could be a normal person from time to time. Jordan felt grounded once more, and like she was actually on the way to being married. It wasn't just a role being assumed or some sort of childhood game played with her sisters. I liked that because I could see how if you have this like really wild life, doing the normal stuff would feel like it's not actually happening to you, or like it is a thing that you're like pretending. And there is some mention earlier about her mother being like incredibly pushy about their wedding and wanting to be on trend to a point that like she finds really irritating, puzzling, a little baffling maybe. And also we find out that like they hired somebody to decorate the house that they live in. And it's not even really to her taste, but she doesn't care enough, to change anything. She was just like, I don't really want to do this. So yeah, come in and do the thing, which points to that they also have money, because hiring a designer and being able to afford all the furniture, that ain't cheap. So let's see. What I can tell you is that I'll be working with people that are the best in their fields. I'll not want for any equipment or support. I know I've said this before, but I'll make sure to ring when I can, or if I can't do that, I'll write. Have I ever failed to keep in touch? The all too familiar response made Brian grip her chin firmly and turn Jordan's gaze to his. I worry about you, Jordan. I know you can handle yourself. I do. It just doesn't make me feel any better when I can't be there with you. It's my job to protect you. You're going to be my wife. And I'm like, I get it. I mean, I totally respect that, like, feeling, but also you can't protect this bitch. She will protect you. You are weak and smell of milk. So finally, she ends this conversation by saying, I love you. And he's like, yeah, okay, you love me, but you're just using that to change the subject. You know you are. And she's like, I mean, yeah, but I do, though. I love you too, Jordan, Brian retorted smoothly, though the hurt in his eyes refused to be covered by any amount of charm. And that is the end of that little section before the asterisks, and that's as far as I got. So, yeah. So that was fun. I'm super curious about what other people she's going to encounter. I'm also wondering about her sister and what her sister's abilities are and what she does. And I just, I'm very curious. So I enjoyed it. And good job to your husband, Heather. Congratulations to him. Are there others, or is this the first, like, is he in the midst of writing the others, or are the others out already? Because, it's called a series, and I'm wondering, like, how many he is planning on, if there's any sort of plan there. But, as somebody who has attempted to write a novel and wound up overwhelmed because I do that to myself, I have nothing but sympathy for authors nowadays, because it's just not, it's not the job it used to be, where you could just go off to a secluded cabin with no contact with the world and just do the writing. It is a lot harder to keep yourself from being distracted these days. The very machines that we write on are the ones that you can also watch porn on, or, you know, disappear into TikTok on. So it's difficult. It's difficult. Heather says there are 3 novels and 1 short story anthology and plans for more eventually. Dope. Cool. All right. Well, guys, Heather has said that she is going to commission more, so keep your ears open for that. They are not scheduled yet, but apparently they'll be coming. And I hope that you enjoyed the coverage, and I'll be seeing you again soon with a new episode. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.